When Marcus Bell walked into the interview, the manager didn't even look up, just chuckled at the name on his resume and said, "Didn't know we were doing charity hires today." What the manager didn't know? Marcus wasn't here to apply. He was here to assess him, and by the end of the day it wouldn't be Marcus explaining himself, it would be the manager. The receptionist didn't even look up at first, just slid the clipboard toward him with a pen and the usual tight smile. "Please sign in, they'll be with you shortly." Marcus Bell signed his name with practiced ease, the letters smooth, deliberate. He didn't say much, just thanked her quietly, took a seat, and waited. The lobby was glass and chrome, designed to impress. Tall ceilings, clean lines, abstract art that cost more than some people's rent. Minutes passed. A few employees glanced at him as they walked through, then glanced again, eyebrows barely raised. Subtle, but not invisible. He knew the look. Then the elevator pinged. Out stepped a man in a designer blazer too tight at the elbows. Bryce. Tall, slick hair. Grin set just a bit too wide. "Marcus Bell?" he called. Marcus stood. Bryce's smile faltered for a second. Just a flicker. Then returned like it never left. He glanced down at the resume in his hand. Just a formality, and chuckled. "Didn't expect that face to match this name," he said, loud enough for the receptionist to hear. She didn't laugh, neither did Marcus. But Bryce did. A short, dry bark. "Kidding, kidding," he added quickly, already turning on his heel. "Come on back." Marcus followed without a word. The hallway was quiet, lined with motivational posters that meant nothing. "Disruption starts here. Think bigger." Empty phrases. They entered a glass-walled conference room, minimalist table, 2 chairs, a pitcher of water that no one would touch. Bryce motioned for him to sit, then dropped into his chair with the kind of ease people only have when they think they're in control. "So," Bryce said, flipping through the resume with exaggerated interest. "Stanford, computer science? Impressive." He didn't sound impressed. "You must have been a diversity pick." Marcus blinked once. "Excuse me?" Bryce grinned. "Relax, man, just joking. You'll get used to the culture here. We're pretty open." Marcus held his gaze. Calm, still. But underneath something shifted. Bryce leaned back in his chair, tapping the resume against the table. "You know," he said, "we get a lot of applicants. Gotta admit, your name caught my eye. Marcus Bell just sounds like it belongs on a boardroom door." He laughed again, like the punchline was obvious. Marcus didn't join him. Didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands, glanced around the room once, and waited. Because what Bryce didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to ask, was that Marcus wasn't here to apply. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to evaluate. And Bryce had just failed the first test. The glass walls made everything feel louder. Even the sound of Bryce flipping pages, too fast to be reading, echoed like static. He skimmed Marcus's resume with a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, like he was waiting for the punchline. "Stanford, huh?" Bryce said, eyebrows raised. "That's a first." He chuckled, tapping the page. "You people usually exaggerate on paper." Marcus didn't blink. He just sat, spine straight, palms resting on his knees. Letting people talk was a skill, a choice. And Bryce had already decided what kind of man he was, without asking a single question. Bryce kept going. "Says here you interned with the Department of Energy? Wow. You must have had one hell of a referral." His voice dripped with disbelief, not curiosity. He flipped another page, paused, then snorted softly. "Machine learning, AI ethics, systems design. Man, you really went all in on this." "This?" Marcus asked, voice even. "On making yourself look the part," Bryce replied. "You know, sometimes I wish more guys like you would be this ambitious. It's refreshing." "Guys like me?" Bryce leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Come on, don't make this a thing." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Bryce misread it, of course. Thought it meant permission. He leaned forward again, suddenly animated. "Here's the thing. The higher-ups want us to expand outreach, right? More inclusive pipelines and all that. HR's been on me non-stop, and I'm not against it, really. But if we're going to bring people on for the optics, we still need them to be competent, you know? He smiled, as if they were co-conspirators in something honest. Marcus looked down at the pitcher of water, still untouched. The condensation had formed a small puddle beneath it, trailing toward the center of the table. "Let me guess," Bryce said, flipping to the final page. "You're also the first in your family to go to college?" Marcus met his eyes. "Third." Bryce blinked. "Oh." Marcus let the moment hang, let the weight of that correction settle in the space between them. "I've reviewed hundreds of resumes in this role," Bryce said after a pause, "and I've gotten pretty good at reading between the lines." "So have I," Marcus said quietly. Bryce smiled again, oblivious. "Well, I think I've seen what I need to see." Marcus nodded once. "So have I." The interview ended without a handshake. Bryce stood, already looking past Marcus as if he'd been dismissed. But Marcus lingered for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping the room, its clean corners, its empty pride. Because he hadn't come for a position. He'd come for a pattern. And now he had one. Bryce glanced at the empty notepad in front of him, then back at Marcus with a smirk. "So, remind me, what position were you applying for again?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He took his time, adjusting the leather folio on his lap, flipping it open with the kind of care that made people nervous. "I'm not here for a position," he said quietly. Bryce blinked, smiled like it was a joke. "Wait, what?" Marcus looked up, his voice steady. "I'm here to evaluate your department. There's an internal audit underway. I was appointed senior advisor to the board last quarter." Silence dropped like a hammer. The room didn't breathe. Bryce sat back slowly, eyes narrowing. "You're with the board?" Marcus nodded once. "I report directly to the audit committee. We're reviewing hiring practices, diversity metrics, and departmental conduct, especially at management level." He reached into his folio and pulled out a stack of papers, clipped neatly. "Your department was flagged." Bryce didn't move. His grin had vanished, replaced by something else, tightness around the jaw, a nervous flick of his fingers against the edge of the table. Marcus continued. "This meeting was part of a blind audit. Leadership wanted unfiltered insight into candidate experience and hiring culture. So I posed as an applicant. The way I was treated today?" He placed the resume on the table, right between them. "It told me everything I needed to know." Bryce finally found his voice. "Listen, I didn't mean anything by those comments. It was just messing around. Office banter." Marcus tilted his head. Office banter shouldn't come at the cost of professionalism or dignity. "Come on," Bryce said, laughing weakly. "You're not going to put this in some report, right?" "I already have," Marcus replied. He reached into the folio again, sliding over a printed email chain. "We've compiled data on your team's hiring history. 92% of your hires over the past 3 years have been white men. Of the candidates of color who made it to the final round, none were offered positions." Bryce stared at the numbers, said nothing. Marcus closed the folio slowly. "We'll be conducting formal interviews with your current team, exit interviews with those who recently left, and speaking with HR about your evaluation process." Bryce's voice dropped. "Is my job on the line?" Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket. "That's not for me to decide." He paused. "But if it were, I'd say jobs built on exclusion rarely stand for long." He walked to the door, calm as ever. Bryce sat frozen, hands twitching near the papers, like he could reshuffle them fast enough to change the outcome. But it was too late. The real interview had already happened, and Bryce had failed it before the questions even began. Bryce sat stiffly, the color draining from his face in slow, visible waves. His hands hovered above the papers on the table like he wasn't sure whether to hide them or hold them up in defense. "I mean, look," he stammered, forcing a chuckle that didn't land. "That number, it's not the whole story. You can't just look at a percentage and—" Marcus raised a hand, calm, steady. Why is your team 92% homogeneous in a city that's 58% people of color? Bryce's mouth opened, then closed. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't blink. He let the silence stretch just long enough to sharpen the edges. "Will we hire the best candidates available?" Bryce offered, his voice thin now, scrambling. "We don't see race. We just go by qualifications." "Then explain why every black applicant over the past 2 years was screened out before a second-round interview." Marcus set down a printed chart. Names, dates, notes in the margins, some circled in red. "These are your own records." Bryce leaned forward, scanning the page. His eyes darted from one line to the next, like he was hoping to find an excuse tucked in between them. Marcus didn't move. His presence filled the space with something heavier than anger, accountability, the kind that didn't yell. It simply showed up and stayed. "We've also found discrepancies in your referral system," Marcus continued. "Internal candidates from underrepresented backgrounds weren't even given interviews, despite stronger technical scores." He paused, letting the weight of that land. "But their names were less familiar, or perhaps less comfortable." Bryce's forehead glistened now. He reached for his water, but his hand shook slightly, and he set it back down. "Look, this sounds bad when you put it that way, but it's not deliberate." Marcus nodded slowly. "Bias rarely is." That stopped Bryce. Just for a second. "And your comments today," Marcus added. "On record, dismissing a resume based on race, suggesting diversity hires are charity, telling me, without knowing anything about me, that I looked the part because of my name." "I was joking," Bryce began. Marcus tilted his head. "You were being evaluated." The room tilted again. Bryce leaned back in his chair, silent now. The confidence drained out of him inch by inch, replaced with something he hadn't worn in years: uncertainty. "This isn't just about you," Marcus said, his voice still even. "It's about the system you've built, the one you've protected, the one that thrives on familiarity and shuts the door to everyone else." Bryce swallowed, loud in the quiet room. Marcus gathered his papers, tucking them neatly into the folio. "We're not here to shame anyone. We're here to change things." Then he stood. Bryce didn't, because for the first time in years, he was the one under the microscope, and the only thing magnified was the truth. The next meeting took place in a different room, one without glass walls, no windows, just neutral gray carpeting and a long table where titles held less weight than truth. HR arrived first, clipboard in hand, polite but pale. A legal representative followed, dressed in navy and silence. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. Bryce sat across from Marcus now, not beside him. No jokes, no smirks, just stillness. The folder in front of Marcus had grown thicker overnight. Inside, hiring logs, interview transcripts, internal emails, exit surveys, receipts, as some might say. But Marcus didn't call it that. He called it record-keeping. "I've reviewed your department's compliance history," he began, voice steady. "There are multiple patterns of concern, both in your recruitment practices and your retention efforts." Bryce didn't respond. He hadn't said much since yesterday. Whatever he'd rehearsed in the mirror that morning had dissolved the moment legal walked in. Marcus flipped open the file and slid a sheet across the table. "This is a summary of employees who resigned in the last 24 months citing hostile environment or lack of growth opportunity. Notice a trend?" Bryce didn't look at the names. He didn't have to. He already knew. A few rows down, one name was highlighted: Sierra Grant, former software engineer, left after being passed over for promotion 3 times, each time by someone with less tenure. "She had a higher project completion rate than anyone on your team," Marcus added. "She's now leading a department at a competitor." The HR rep shifted in her seat. Another document followed. Recommendations. Some names underlined. Bryce's among them. "These individuals have either failed to meet company equity standards or have actively contributed to a culture of exclusion," Marcus said, matter of fact. "The board has reviewed this list. Terminations will be effective immediately. with severance negotiated as appropriate. Bryce finally looked up. You're serious? Marcus didn't flinch. You made this list. I'm just the one holding it. The legal rep nodded once, then passed Bryce a slim envelope. He didn't open it, just stared. Your access will be revoked by end of day, Marcus continued. We ask that you return your badge and company property before 5 p.m. HR stood. The meeting was over. Bryce stayed seated, a man reduced to silence not by volume, but by consequence. Marcus gathered his notes, stood, and buttoned his jacket with care. He turned to the HR rep. Let's talk next steps. I want to discuss rebuilding, not just the org chart, but the culture. She nodded, grateful. A breath she hadn't let out in months finally escaped. By sunset, Bryce's email was deactivated, his name removed from the company's Slack, and the man once dismissed as a charity hire. He now held the pen rewriting the rules. The lobby looked different on the way out. Same marble floors, same brushed steel fixtures, but the energy had shifted. The air was lighter now, like something heavy had finally been named and lifted. Marcus walked with quiet purpose, leather folio in hand, coat folded neatly over one arm. He passed by the same receptionist who had signed him in hours earlier. Her eyes followed him now, not with suspicion, but with a quiet kind of recognition. She stood a little straighter as he approached. Excuse me, Marcus said gently. There was a young man here earlier this morning, sat on that bench. He nodded toward a corner near the elevators. I believe his name was Jason. The receptionist's brow furrowed, then softened. Yes. He came in for an interview with Bryce. Waited almost an hour before they told him they were overbooked. Looked heartbroken when he left. Marcus nodded. Could you do me a favor? Let him know I'd like to see him. Tomorrow morning, same time. Her eyes widened. Of course, sir. Should I tell him who... Just let him know he'll be meeting with someone who actually wants to hear what he has to say. He smiled, not wide, not showy, but enough to soften the sharp edges of the day. Then he handed her a card, simple, clean. His name embossed in silver, Marcus Bell, senior advisor to the board. She looked down at it, then back up. It's really good to see someone like you here. Marcus paused, meeting her eyes. It shouldn't be rare. She nodded, lips pressed together. As he walked to the exit, the automatic doors opened like a quiet exhale. The city waited outside, bustling, indifferent, full of systems that didn't always welcome men like him. But today, one of those systems had shifted. Not because he'd shouted, not because he'd threatened, but because he'd shown up, listened, documented, and refused to be underestimated. He didn't know Jason's story. Not yet. Didn't know the brilliance he might bring or the barriers he'd already faced. But he knew this much. No qualified candidate should be denied opportunity because someone like Bryce decided they didn't fit the culture. So tomorrow Marcus would sit across from Jason, not as a gatekeeper, but as a bridge. Because talent isn't the issue, access is. And too often, people like Jason never get past the lobby. But this time, someone had held the door open and left it unlocked. The door to the office no longer sticks. Someone finally had it adjusted. The nameplate has changed too. No longer Bryce Whitaker in bold metallic print. Now it reads, Rima S. Patel, etched in clean glass. No ego, just presence. Inside, the space feels warmer. The cold blues and grays have softened, replaced with a small jade plant on the windowsill, a corkboard pinned with handwritten thank you notes, and a framed quote hung beside the door. Power doesn't have to raise its voice. Rima doesn't. She listens more than she speaks. And when she does, her words carry. Calm, clear, measured. She doesn't perform leadership. She practices it. Marcus stops by every Thursday afternoon, not because he has to, but because change, once sparked, needs tending. He walks the hallways now with ease, not watched, not questioned, known. Young analysts pause when they see him, some standing a little straighter, others eager to show him their work. His presence does more than inspire. It affirms. You belong here, it says, without needing to say it. Jason stops by his office often too. Nervous at first, then curious, then confident. The first time he presented a proposal, he stumbled through the opening slide. By the third meeting, he was fielding questions with a firm voice and eyes that didn't flinch. "You've got the mind," Marcus told him one day. "Don't let anyone make you doubt the rest." Jason had nodded, a quiet fire catching in his chest. The department is different now. Not perfect, not fixed overnight, but evolving, open, diverse in more than just appearance. The hiring panel is broader, the interview rubrics revised. A mentorship initiative, Rima's idea, pairs junior hires with senior leaders. Accountability is no longer whispered, it's expected. As for Bryce, his name doesn't come up much, not in meetings, not in conversations. His absence speaks louder than his tenure ever did. Marcus walked past Rima's office just last week. She was mid-discussion with a small group. 2 interns, 1 entry-level analyst, and a UX designer fresh out of grad school. They were laughing, heads bent over a whiteboard full of ideas. She looked up just briefly, caught Marcus's eye, and nodded. He nodded back. Because this wasn't about replacing one person with another. It was about rebuilding a foundation that should have never been cracked in the first place. And Marcus, he never needed revenge. That was too small, too temporary. What he wanted, what he chose, was something deeper. Repair. Every policy reviewed. Every barrier removed. Every time someone walks into an interview and is seen fully, not filtered through bias. That is the win. And every week that Marcus walks these halls and sees someone who reminds him of who he was when the door didn't open the first time, he smiles. Not loud, but proud.